whilst we wait for the next 5 minutes, so cut in on your time. I like to have a bit of audience participation during my lectures, like show of hands and various questions, if you don't mind. Now, one thing that I'm always intrigued by is how far people have travelled to see me, because that's quite flattering. So, who has travelled over 50 miles to get here to see me? How many miles? Don't make it up. How much? Just over 100. Any advance on 100? Any advance on Heidi? How many? 140. Right, here we go. Come in. There you go. There you go. At great expense. No, that's supposed to be enough. Now, how many raffle tickets are being sold at the back, ladies? Oh, she's oblivious, the lady selling books. Ladies? Ladies? Ladies, do you want to buy?
Here we come.
Where is she?
Right, 2 tickets for the Home First Conference worth £112 are yours if you draw right on the raffle. We can't be fairer than that, can we? Excellent. Right, buy up all the tickets now. Right, are we ready? Can we get going?
I'm just going to say to people to make sure people are quite quiet. People at the back need to be very quiet because obviously it's quite a big hall. We need to make sure that everyone's able to listen. So is it better to draw the curtains and things, or is it be okay?
I would draw the curtains probably. I think the screen's quite bright. Can everybody see at the back? That big screen? This is the world's smallest screen. I've done a lecture too. Well, there you go. Right, you ready, John?
Just let me know what lights you want on.
Yeah, back ones as well. Yeah, because I want to feel this gentleman's leg. Oh, that was nice. No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, do you want to come down here then, John?
I'm going to have my 1 minute fame.
Yeah.
Right, so I'd like to welcome everyone along this evening. There's people come from long distances, I think, as we've just established. Those of you that are more local will know that Susan organises different talks for charity. This time the money is going to Shorefield School, which for some of you, I'm a teacher there and there's a former student here. You'll know that it's a special needs school in Clacton which caters for young people from the ages of 4 through to 19 who have a range of special needs. So all the money made will be going to there. Sorry about the size of the screen, but we're not a club as such, we're just sort of my wife that tries to organise things. A really big thank you to Keith. I knocked on his door about 7:05 this evening as he was having a shower and said, please, we need a projector. Unfortunately, he was coming here anyway, so he was able to come and help us out. Lots of people know of Gary. He's by far the most well-known speaker that we've ever had, so we're really grateful for everyone who's come. I'm sure he'll be able to say all the things that he wants to say, but I'd just like to thank him for coming. As you know, he lives in Yorkshire. West Yorkshire, so in fact you've come further in anyway.
Yes, I'm 220 miles.
So I know you'd rather listen to him than me, so I'm going to introduce you to Gary HESELTINE.
Thank you, I'm not famous. It's me. Okay, few straw polls before I get going. How many people in this room, and you don't have to be embarrassed, I'm not going to pick on you. No, I'm not. Just put your hand up if you've ever had what you loosely call the UFO experience of any kind, sighting. So put your hands fully up, not like one. I would say, thank you. I would say there's probably a good 80, 85 people in this room. And that's probably 20, 25 of you. Okay, now that's interesting for me. Here's another question. How many people in this room, put your hand up if you've got a genuine interest in UFOs? Alright, so probably half. Okay. Put your hand down. You can go a bit faster if you want. Right? Right. And again, I do this so I know where to pitch the level of the lecture in terms of knowledge. Yeah? So here's another question. How many people in this room think that some, I repeat the word some, UFO sightings are extraterrestrial in origin? Put your hand up if you think that. No? Quite a lot of you. Alright? Okay. Who doesn't think there's anything to this other than misidentification? Put your hands up if you're totally sceptical. Okay, please leave. Only joking. No, right. No, I do that because it does help me gauge how much information I give. Because, in a sense, my interest comes from a sighting when I was 16 years of age. And I'm now 56, so I've got 40 years of following this story, as it were. And it's an unfolding story. But I think we are actually moving to a conclusion. And I will talk about that in the second half. Okay, I've actually just come back from San Marino last weekend, which is on the Italian border, for an international conference, and I met with some important people there, some scientists and some really prominent people, and I'll give you a bit of a flavour of what's coming out of that in the second half, because there is just a chance that we might be on the brink of something quite major in the next months, possibly. Yeah, which I don't normally say something like that, but I think there is some cause for a little bit of optimism. And I'll explain that in the second half. Okay, so who am I? I could just do that, but I'll tell you about myself, right? Okay, my name's Gary Heseltine, and between 1983 and 1989, I served in the Royal Air Force Police. So 6 years as an RAF police officer, and for 3 of my 6 years, I guarded nuclear weapons, called ST814 duties, and it wire walking for anybody that's been in the RAF might know. And basically it was really boring. You walked up a piece of land with a machine gun or a rifle, and you were protecting nuclear weapons bunkers. Okay, I did that for 3 of my 6 years at 2 bases, one in RAF Honington in Suffolk, which is not a million miles away from here, and another in what was then West Germany, RAF Lavra, 2.5 years. Okay. So that was my background, and then I left in 1989 to join the British Transport Police. Right, okay, and then I served in the British Transport Police between 1989 until the end of March 2013, when I had just under 24 years service, but I retired early. I could have gone on for another 6 years, but something compelled me to say that the time was right to do what I'm doing now, which was launch a magazine, an e-zine. It's not in print, but I retired to set up my own UFO magazine, which I call UFO Truth Magazine, which is online in the sense of it's not in print, it's bi-monthly, so sent to you every 2 months. It's sent direct to your email, so you don't have to do a thing. And what makes it a little bit different, and this is where I'm trying to make a difference to this subject, is that it's 96 pages every 2 months, but all the articles are written by world-renowned experts, either as regular columnists or guest contributors. So basically, all the top researchers that I've met, who I respect, I approached and said, would you write for me, either on a regular or occasional basis, for UFO Truth magazine? Okay? So what I would say to you is that if you are genuinely interested in this subject, I would recommend that you subscribe to the magazine. For the simple reason is that there are a million websites out there, and we get lots of armchair experts, but most of the information is not corroborated, and it's just a story put out as fact. It lacks corroboration. So it's hard to know which is the truth and which is fiction. And there's a lot of fiction out there. But what I do with UFO Truth is to say, well, if you're interested, well, let's go to I've got everybody under one roof, and it's now the biggest English language UFO publication in the world. Okay, and they all write freely because it helps promote their research, etc., etc. So if you're genuinely interested, I would recommend you subscribe. If you want to subscribe to the magazine, today I do it at a special reduced rate, and it's going to be £12, and all you have to give me is your name, your email address that I can read, because that's how you receive the magazine. Yep, and a telephone number in case I can't read it or whatever. Yep, so come and see me at the break if you want a subscription form to fill in. Okay, it's normally $16.99. Alright, okay, so that's my police background. Now, in my police service, in that 24 years, the last 19 years of my service, I was what's called a detective constable, which is the bottom rung, PC, and then the CID, the guys who deal at the sharp end doing investigations, murder, manslaughter, rape, is the DC or the DS, Detective Sergeant. I was an advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses, tier 3, as high as you could go, other than becoming a recruiting or an assessor. But in terms of actual sitting in on the interview, I was as high as you could go, tier 3. Okay? After that, it becomes either training or as an advisor. Okay? Now, that was my thing. I liked interviewing people. And I was involved in the London bombings, interviewing first-line responding police officers, which was very rewarding, very tragic, obviously, but many of the police officers who responded to the London bombing saw some terrible things. But I was called in with others to plot movements of people and potential terrorists. And that was very, very interesting. So very, very interesting. Okay, so I did not want to ever go higher in the police because I didn't like the petty politics, to be honest. And basically you had to have your brain removed if you got any higher, and you were stuck behind a desk and it was all facts and figures. Even though there is that much paperwork in the job, even as a detective, 30% of your time was actually going out and looking at people. The fun part, for want of a better expression, 70% of it was still paperwork. But believe me, if you got beyond sergeant and above, it was 90% tied to a desk. So I like to be active. Alright, so that's my policing background. Now, what happened is that, should I tell you about my sighting? That kicks it off, right. When I was 16, I had no interest in this subject whatsoever, prior to my sighting. And I didn't see a spaceship, I didn't see an alien or anything like that, but I saw something profoundly strange. And this is what I saw. I was walking with my then girlfriend along a long, narrow footpath. It was in total darkness. So if this is the path that we're walking, on the left side there was my comprehensive school football fields and school, and on the right side was a large set of allotments and a fence. Okay, so I'm walking this path. Now at the end of this path there was a housing estate. So of course it's maybe 8:30 at night, it's dark, or getting dark, and all the electricity is on. It's one of those rare nights that we have in England, we don't get many, where there's not a cloud in the sky and it's really warm at night, t-shirt weather at night. Really balmy night, not a cloud in the sky, all the stars are out twinkling. We don't get many of these, and as we're walking along, we see what I can only describe as a bright white light. No distinct shape, and it was at this angle, kind of a 60-degree angle, and moving from our right to left. So if this is the path, it's coming this way. Now, at first we just thought, what's that? But when it went past us, so there, and therefore we're behind its flight path, a strange thing happened. All the housing in the distance cut off into total pitch black, like a power cut. But it wasn't all of it, it was only the bit that appeared to be behind the object's flight path. Now at the time I was pushing my cycle, right? And so I said, well, first of all, my girlfriend Dawn, she got immediately frightened, rightly or wrongly associating that light with somehow causing the power cut. She got anxious, so we watched it, and as it went a bit further, going away from us very slowly, no noise whatsoever, second power cut. of all the housing in the distance. So we're now looking over the school fields to the rest of the housing estate, plunged into darkness. Really weird. So I said, get on the bike. A Lincolnshire expression is croggering, 2 on a bike. She's sat in a crossbar, I'm pedalling like mad. We go around literally 200 metres and I drop her at her house, which was in darkness, total power cut, everything's up. They're clambering around to get candles, etc. I then get on the bike and then I decide to go back the way I came, along the long footpath, and then onto what's an area, a main road called Grange Lane South, which runs for about a mile to near my house. And I pedal like mad. And the whole area is pitch black, nothing on, street lights, house lights, all the electricity off, so it's really black. Now, as I come to the corner near to my house, where Grange Lane South bend round to the left, suddenly I realise that actually the power's on in the distance on this corner. And you have this clear demarcation line of going from darkness, pitch black, to the power's on. It was like almost a line effect. So you got to the corner, and as I got to the corner, the power is on. So I'm thinking, have I got ahead of this light? So I look over my right shoulder, and I had managed to get ahead of the light, and it was now just slightly behind me. Hence why I don't think the power was cut off yet. So basically, I went round 2 corners, maybe another couple hundred metres, Westerdale Road onto Baysdale Road where I lived, dropped my bike outside the house, rushed in to my parents who were having a cup of tea. So it's supper time, 8:30, 9 o'clock, something like that. And I said, come outside, I think there's going to be a power cut caused by this strange light. They look at me like I'm stupid, as you would. Don't get up. So I rushed through the hall, through into the kitchen into the backyard, turn around to look back at my semi-detached house, just in time to see the object coming over my rooftop. It's now higher altitude, and I don't know why I do this, but I put my arm up like I'm answering a question in class. Okay? But there might be method in this when you hear what happened. Because as it came over, it went past me. So if this is like my position on the ground, when it went past my arm, I'm then technically behind it. And guess what happened? At the very moment it passed beyond me, and therefore I was behind it, the whole area plunged into darkness. Now, isn't that ridiculous? How can I predict a power cut? Ridiculous. What's the odds of that? Billions to 1, if anything. So I realised that at that point, that light, whatever it was, must have had some interaction with the power grid. Because how could I move from one geographical position, move to another one, and predict to the very second, almost, that there was a power cut? Ridiculous. So I realised that now there's some strange things that happen when you get into this subject, and it's a word I'd never actually heard of. The word is synchronicity. I'd never heard of the word until I started doing research. But people would mention this word, and as time went on, some very odd coincidences, that's what you want to call it. I would say the word synchronicity is a better word, because, for example, this is 1976. This is just before the age of VHS cassettes, Betamax, etc. So home entertainment was still just about to come in. And basically what happened was, the only thing I could do to investigate UFOs, having had no interest up to this point, was go to my local second-hand bookshop to look for books on flying saucers. So that's what I did. Now, of all the, what must be thousands of books written over the years on UFOs, the first book that I get turns out to be quite profound and a synchronistic, because it's written by a Major Donald Kehoe. Now, for those of you who are quite familiar with the subject of UFO history, he turns out to be one of the key players in the history of the subject. So of all the books in all the world, in all the bars kind of thing, that's the book that I buy first. And in that book, straight away, I come across a chapter on what's called the New York Blackout. Now, for those of you who don't know, in 1965, on the eastern seaboard, New York side, there was a massive power cut that lasted about 6 to 8 hours, plunged about 6 or 7 million people into darkness, caused chaos. Some people even died getting trapped in lifts and things like that. But basically, that was rumoured to have been triggered by UFOs affecting the power grid. I didn't know this at the time until I read it in this book. But straight away, what a coincidence that the first book I get turns out to be a very famous book by a famous author, and two, that there is this validation of what I'd seen, a link to a power cut, which is a bit weird really, because there's lots of books. So anyway, that kind of resonated with me. But basically after that, other than joining what was called British UFO Research Association, BUFORA, as an associate member, I never did any active research. I went to a local UFO group and I thought they were all crazy, so I didn't go again. They all were a bit weird. Okay, and that was basically it. And after that, other than anything that I saw in the newspapers, books or whatever, I basically went away and had a life. Air Force, police, 2 children, marriage. Yeah, traditional kind of life. Went away, had a life. And the story, my story, really begins in about 1995. So we're jumping about 19 years after my sighting, when I'm on Leeds City Railway Station and I go into W.H. Smith's. I'm already a detective at this point, so I'm lucky I can just wander around in a suit kind of thing. And on the 4th shelf of one of the parts of the store, I come across this magazine called UFO Magazine. It was a printed, glossy A4 magazine, which I'd never heard of. And straight away something like reignited in me, and I started to get the magazine, which was then bi-monthly, then became monthly. So over the next couple of years, I then began to get the magazine avidly and read up what had been happening in the intervening years. And a lot of new authors had come on over those intervening years, so I got those books and started reading up on it. Now, in a strange kind of way, what I didn't realise is that something within me was drawing me towards doing active research. And cutting a long story short, it culminated when I had a dream, and I don't usually remember dreams, but I must dream, but I don't usually remember it. But I had I'm waking up having had a very vivid dream about a scenario of what could cause disclosure, i.e. governments to reveal just exactly what they really do know. And that's kind of weird, because how that came about was something compelled me to then write a film script. I'd never written a thing, ever. But within 6 weeks I'd ended up writing a script from A to B, a journey, middle and end. I'd never written a thing. It's like something compelled me to do it. Okay? As a result of that, I then thought, I want some kind of validation from an expert in the subject. So who better to go to than the editor of the magazine that had kind of reawakened my interest? And it was a guy called Graham Birdsall. Now, here's a synchronicity for you. In all the bars in all the world, guess where he worked in relation to me? 12 miles away. Could have been 300 miles away. But it was on my doorstep. And of course, as a CID officer, I can go around in a playing car and have the odd cup of tea here and there, nobody knows. So I went across and basically dropped the script in on a Sunday afternoon, dropped it in, thinking I'll never hear from him again. 6 weeks later, he rings me up out of the blue and he goes, "This is brilliant, make a great film." And he actually wrote it out and gave me a certificate. I said, "Brilliant." He then said, "Come to our conference that I organised." He organised the conference, a 3-day conference. So I went to my first UFO conference, and at this conference there were scientists there and credible people. And without realising it, something was pulling me in to do something. The problem was, as a detective, your time is not your own. If a rape occurs, you don't go home for basically a few days while you catch the person, spend loads of hours at work, yeah, a few hours at home, back at work, long shifts, until you've got it sorted and somebody's charged, that kind of thing. So I could never be one of those traditional people that go to a club every Thursday. Couldn't do that, so it had to be something on my terms. This is where it gets strange again. I have a second dream that I remember. Don't usually remember dreams. Second dream was database for police officers. Wow. So who did I go see? Go see Graham Birdsall, the guy who ran the magazine, and said, "I've had this idea for this police database. Would you allow me to write an article in your glossy magazine?" Never written anything in the print like that. And he went, "Yeah, this is very credible. Police officers, you're a serving officer." So he basically gave me the okay. So in January 2002, I write my first printed article in a magazine. that goes out in WH Smiths. Alright? And that was a massive thrill for me because I'd never written anything. At that point I'd printed anything. And so that came out, and straight away retired police officers contacted me, because what I was saying was, if you're serving, if you're retired and you've had a UFO experience, come and tell me. I'm a police officer. I will happy to listen to your stories. I won't ridicule you, as long as they check out to be who they say they are. And I would do that during that process. They'd have to send me photographs in uniform, they'd have to provide me their career background and things like that. So once they'd established who they were, that they were bona fide police officers, they could either go public with their account or request anonymity. And there was generally a rule, and it still exists to this day. If you're still a serving officer, you generally want anonymity, unless you're with many other police officers at the time this occurred. Yeah, because then you can kind of corroborate each other. If you're a lone officer, you will almost certainly want anonymity. But providing they check out with me who they say they are, I will grant them what's called a confidential source. Because I don't want to put their career at risk or have them ridiculed. Yeah? What I'm after is those stories. And basically, when I started the database, I had 6 cases involving around 10 police officers. Now, after 14 years, I have over 550 cases, going back to 1901, believe it or not, involving over 1,050 British police officers. That's quite a lot. Yeah? And I still don't think I've only scratched the tip of an iceberg, because it's only the ones that maybe have an interest or see me in a newspaper or whatever. I'm currently writing a book about these sightings, which I've been meaning to do for the last 3 years. But since I launched the magazine, when I retired in April of 2013, you get what's called the editor's curse. Many an editor, they're a great editor, but they don't actually find the time to write the book that they should have. So I've been saying to myself for the last 3 years, I've got to devote the time to do it, because this story should be told. And now, this year, I said I'm going to do it this year, so I'm about 200 pages in. Okay, so we're probably over the halfway mark. Yeah, so hopefully by the end of this year we'll have something like a 350 page book just on British police sightings. Okay, so hopefully that will happen. Okay, so this has switched itself off right now. So when we look at the cases on the database, they're separated into 2 areas: on-duty sightings and off-duty sightings. Now, I don't really see much of a distinction between the two, for the simple reason is that the police officer is trained, he's not infallible, but he's trained on how to record an incident as it unfolds, i.e. in a chronological, logical manner. Time, date, place, this happened, that happened, in a sequential sequence. And they think like that, and they're trained like that, because they have to give evidence in court or at an inquest. So it makes sense. So when people say, well, police are not any special training, that's incorrect. They do have training on how to present material of an incident, any kind of incident, in a logical manner. So it's a vital thing. So basically, the reason why I include off-duty sightings is because if you're a police officer and you go home at night and you're in your back garden and you see a UFO, are you still not the police officer? You're still using the same senses, the fact that you're just not at work. So, separated by on and off duty. The majority of the cases that I've got, probably 70% of them are on-duty sightings. But about a third of them are off-duty sightings, often corroborated with their wives, children are in the car when they see something. Okay? So what we're going to do is look at some of the cases on the database, and they are amazing. I'll kind of make some conclusions at the end. Now, before we start actually looking at police sightings, you have to understand what evidence is. Most people don't understand what evidence is. I'm going to choose you again, is that alright? Right. What I'm going to do is show you a scenario that says that a UFO incident produces exactly the same information as any other incident, whether it be a murder or a rape or whatever. For example, let's now look at a murder scenario. You can all relate to this. I have a knife, I then go in front of the whole audience, stab, 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 kill this gentleman here with a knife. You see me all do it, what do you become? Alright, now let's go to a scenario. Somebody shouts, hey, there's a flying saucer outside. And we rush over to those curtains. Some will pull them back, some will go rush out the building. Some will be on their mobile phone. What do we become? What's the difference? None. Okay? There's your knife, is the murder weapon that you see. What's the difference me going over to that window, filming the UFO outside of my mobile phone? Does that not produce evidence, that free piece of film? It's exactly the same. So there is no distinction between a UFO investigation in terms of evidence and what evidence is and ordinary crime, etc. Does that make sense? There's no difference whatsoever. Okay. Now, before we actually go into the police cases, let me tell you why I think ET is here now, surveilling this planet and interacting with this planet. I come from a very evidential background. As a detective, if I don't know what evidence is and that would stand up in a court of law, then I must be pretty stupid. Yeah? So my definition of evidence that would support the theory that some UFOs are ET is based on what I call the high caliber witness character. Yeah? So, how many people in the room realise that 2,000 military pilots have been sent up around the world to intercept UFOs? Many radar confirmed sightings. Many dogfights. Pilots have died chasing UFOs. This is not fiction, this is fact. You can produce the written documents to support what I'm saying. Not many people realise it. 3,000 worldwide commercial pilots. Right? Now here's an interesting thing. When we, how many people have not ever been on a plane? Alright? Alright. Right, now, the only reason why I mention that is because there's this striking contrast that don't add up. All these pilots have made excellent sightings, but largely the media, and we'll talk about the media in the second half, ridicule this subject, largely, and it's wrong, but it is deliberate. But here's the thing, right? How come a pilot, let's for example say a Boeing 747 takes off London to New York in broad daylight, and they're over at the Atlantic, and they see a silver disc-shaped object fly around the plane 3 times. All the crew see it out the windows, the navigator sees it, the pilot. It's confirmed on ground radar, airborne radar, blah blah blah. Great evidence. Okay, that would stand up in a court of law, but they get ridiculed. Now, if this was an air crash investigation, nothing to do with UFOs, and the pilot of the same plane had to ditch into the ocean because some of its engines failed for some strange reason, and it had to ditch, and the pilot survived, who would be the most important person that the aircraft investigators would go for? The pilot. So they'll believe him if it's an ordinary thing. But if it's a UFO, great. And yet, here's the rub of the green. What do we give to a pilot when we step on that plane? We give him something. We don't think about it. We take it for granted. What do we give him?
Trust.
Not more than trust. What do we give him? More than trust. Well said. Who said that? Our lives. When we get on a plane, we hand over our life to that pilot through his experience to get us from A to B. Get us up, get us down. Do we not? And that's an awesome responsibility. So how crazy it is that when pilots see things, they're disbelieved. Well, black box is important, but that's a piece of physical machinery. That's not the person. We'll talk about black boxes later. All right? But what I'm just saying is that over the years, many pilots have reported things and they have been ridiculed because of the way the system is set up. And I'll explain why that comes in. So, high caliber witness categories. Military pilots, commercial pilots, astronauts. No questions during the lecture because it will be there forever. Alright? Ask me at the end.
It was a statement. I was about to say that a lot
No,
of
you're
pilots-
interrupting me. You're
Sorry,
interrupting me,
okay.
please don't. Because seriously, if we do that, then we lose control, and then at the end of the lecture, it's 5 over. Alright? So please ask me any questions at the end. Alright? So, high caliber witness categories. Military pilots, commercial pilots, astronauts, cosmonauts, radar operators, sonar operators. Sonar, that's underwater, we'll talk about that later. Observer corps, people who are trained to recognise aircraft in the sky. And there's actually a former member of the Observer Corps here who was already talking to me. Specialist people who recognise objects in the sky. Scientists, senior military commanders. And at the bottom of that pile, probably 8th or 9th in that list, is police officers. Yeah, because of the training on how to relate things in a logical manner. So if we look at all those high caliber witness categories, we end up with a really powerful body of evidence, yeah, of testimony. But that testimony is then often backed up by telemetry data from aircraft, radar tapes from air traffic controllers, yeah? Sometimes gun camera footage, although most of the time any gun camera footage taken by a military jet is taken away, never to be seen again. Okay? In the police, you have what's called the circumstantial evidence case. Now, people think that when you go to court for a murder, that it's straightforward, or a rape or whatever. It very rarely is. Rarely do you have all the pieces of the jigsaw. So when you go to a Crown Court for a serious case, you're reliant on what's called the circumstantial evidence case. And I once was in Middlesbrough Crown Court on a job of mine, and the judge summed it up at the end what he thought how important the circumstantial evidence case was. And he basically gave this definition, which has always stuck with me. He said the circumstantial evidence case is very powerful, providing you have enough pieces of the jigsaw to create an overwhelming and compelling picture of what's occurred. The jury can then make a decision. So it's pieces of a jigsaw. Okay? Now, if we had a piece of, let's say that flag of Britain, we cut it up into 100 pieces, all of the same size. And then we put them in a box and we take out randomly 70 pieces. And we assemble them on the floor. Do you think we'd be able to work out what the full picture was if we had 70%? We would probably, wouldn't we? We'd probably get an idea on what it is. And here's the reality. In UFO terms, we probably have 70% of the jigsaw. And we don't have the rest. But that 70%, in many cases, is very compelling. Yeah? We can look at small little nuggets, you put them all together. So when we look at the high caliber witness categories, it's an absolutely exceptional body of evidence backed up by physical evidence in terms of radar tapes, telemetry data, etc., etc. Documentary evidence, records. So I think, for me, it's overwhelming that ET is here. And if we put it as a perspective of 100%, we're only talking about 3%. So of all the cases reported as UFO, 97% turn out to have a mundane explanation. It's usually about 95%, then you get a residue of 5%, then when the investigation begins you lose another 2% after investigation. But then you are left with just 3% that defy explanation after investigation. And that 3% is 3% of millions of cases worldwide. It's not just a few, it's many, many thousands. Okay? So conclusions, 3% ET. Okay. I've mentioned this already. It was created out of a sense of frustration. When I first started looking at UFOs in the 70s after I'd had my sighting, I would quickly see that the media made us all think that we're stupid. Anybody that says, I believe in UFOs or ET is crazy. And then all those years later, when I'd had come across UFO magazine, and then I'd had the dreams, started the database, or just in the run up to the database, it was that sense of frustration that all those years I'd been away, those 19 years, nothing had changed. It was still being ridiculed in the newspaper. And yet I was reading about pilots chasing UFOs in broad daylight, and I'm thinking, that should be on the 6 o'clock news. Why isn't it on the 6 o'clock news? So that's how I get involved. Okay? Now when I first started the idea of the database, in my force, basically they had what was called an intranet, which was, it was just at the same time as really people getting on the World Wide Web, and there were things like walking clubs, martial arts clubs. It was just for police officers within the police force, in our force. And I set one up that said UFOs. And of course then I got expected, as I thought, it was like, name me up Scotty, my inspector's an alien. I kind of got all these jokes, nanu. So at first it was funny, and I expected that because the police have a unique banter. That's fine. And there is a general rule that when your police officers are in a crowd, there's a lot of banter that goes on. But when I would get on one-to-one on patrol, or on doing some stakeout somewhere, they'd start asking serious questions about UFOs. And sometimes they'd start telling me about some of the things that they've seen when they're in the military. So there's a bit of a distinction. If they're in a crowd, they don't like to put their head above the parapet, and it's all a bit of a joke. But one-to-one, they'll start telling you stories, and that's what started to happen. Okay, after 70 years of modern research, which really begins from the late 40s onwards, these are the 4 distinct shapes that we have, regularly reported worldwide. The disc, the sphere, cigar, and obviously the triangle. Now people will say, well, it's just triangle now, and it's just changing perspective as, you know, things are in cycles. Once it was disc, then it became cigars, and now it's triangle. Not exactly true, because sightings of triangles have been around since the 60s. But yes, they do kind of change a little bit. Well, these are the predominant. And the other one that's not on there, because it's not a specific shape, but the most common of all UFO sightings is what I saw. An indistinct bright white light. That's the most common UFO. But in terms of structured shape, these are the 4 main ones. Okay? Now, let's look at flight characteristics of a genuine UFO. And the reason why I'm telling you this up front is because when we go into the police cases, you'll understand where I'm coming from. Because they do many of these things. Okay. After 70 years of research on UFOs in the modern era, these are the characteristics of a UFO that I would say was ET. Instant acceleration, instant stop. Instant reverse. Right angle, 90-degree turn. No noise. Straight up. Straight down. You're visible. You're gone. Like a light bulb. You're there. You're gone. And vice versa. And generally there is no noise associated with genuine UFOs. Sometimes a low hum at close proximity. Now, people go, oh, it's stealth, it's stealth. Nothing to do with stealth. Totally different flight envelope. What does a stealth plane do? F-117 takes off on a conventional runway with wheels. Goes up in the air. He goes, oh, nobody can see me on radar. Oh, I'll do a few bombing runs here, and then I'll land again on wheels. It's a conventional plane. Cannot do any of those manoeuvres that I've just described. And the general rule on stealth is that if it happened from testing to become known to the public, 15 to 20 years. Like the F-117 was first flown in 1975. It didn't become known, the little batwing one, didn't become known until the first Gulf War in 1991, 16-year gap. But that means then, if it was stealth, what about big discs that were seen during the war in 1940s? They should have been out in the 60s. 60s should have been out in the 80s. The 80s should have been out in 2000. Ain't stealth. They don't move anything like stealth. Okay? Okay, let's look at the police cases. Now, I've done that bit of a kind of a history lesson for you on what to look out for, because many of these sightings have these common factors that make sense once you know the context in which they're made. Okay, now believe it or not, the first case is an historical newspaper account, but it names the officers and it describes the incident. Now, obviously something that's 1901, everybody's long gone. There's no way we can actually ever prove that this occurred. But I like the details that were reported. Bear in mind that this is not the era of disinformation, this is not the era of political intrigue, this is 1901. So nobody were making up jokes and things like that, like people do now. Alright, so this detailed account says that early hours, 2 police officers walking around, checking, rattling doors as they used to do, and they see a cigar-shaped object. No noise. Green glow. Okay, so people will go, oh, well, it's an early dirigible. Yes, they were kind of like cigar shaped, but what did they have underneath? Little propeller, little gondola underneath, little engine. This was seen at low altitude and then moved off very fast. Green glow. You don't see many gondolas with green glow. It doesn't sound like an early airship. Okay? If you remember my high caliber witness category, I mentioned sonar operators. Now you don't kind of think of UFOs and sonar operators, submarines, underwater, but how many of you realise that many cases worldwide have UFOs seen and either leaving water, large bodies of water, or entering water? Worldwide. Their technical name is USO, underwater submerged object. Yeah? Many times military submarines have reported fast moving objects in excess of 200 miles an hour underwater. And I think the fastest we can go is about 60 knots for the top submarines. So this is some kind of different technology. Yeah? Now let me offer you a suggestion as well. Is not a lot of people realise this, that we know more about the surface of the moon and Mars than we do about our oceans. We only know 1% of our oceans, which leaves a hell of a lot of 99% that we don't have a clue on. So if you were going to have a secret base akin to the film Abyss, where would you put it? In the deepest trenches, and hence it now makes sense that UFOs are seen coming in and out of water. Does it not? Yep. So perhaps they don't actually need to travel millions of light years all the time, because they may be here and have been here for a long time, and they just do what they do and we do what we do. Which draws to a very interesting correlation between that and nuclear weapons. UFOs are regularly being seen over nuclear missile facilities, nuclear bases, nuclear power plants, and if there's one thing that I would recommend you to do after seeing me tonight, other than subscribe to the magazine, is go on to Vimeo on the internet and pay £4.99 to watch a documentary which is by far, in my opinion, the best documentary ever made, full stop. And it's called UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link. And it's by an American researcher called Robert Hastings. It's the same of his book. But what's so good about this is that they use fantastic CGI graphics to bring many of these military incidents to life. And what's even better is all the military commanders in about 10 different incidents worldwide have gone on camera, many for the first time, to say that when they've been in their underground silos with their missile keys ready to start nuclear Armageddon, UFOs have been above and switched off their nuclear weapons. They've gone offline. Now we don't think that's kind of real, do we? But this is real. But you don't know this because the media don't tell you this. So if you do one thing from here, watch that. And if you watch that, which I think should be shown to everybody in the world, and then ask the question, is it real or not? Because I tell you what, everybody would say it was real after watching that. The CGI graphics bring it to life. So, going back to this case, 3 police officers, Bristol Channel, see a UFO, USO, emerge out of the water and fly off. So it's an interesting little case. 3 uniformed officers, turn the bed to this. Okay? And it was officially reported to their HQ at Glamorgan. Officially logged. Okay, now this is one of the most famous cases of the 60s. I'm not going to go through 550 cases, I should be like that. I feel like that now. So. Right, so it's just a selection. But this is a very famous case, and surprisingly, this is just a one only officer, which you probably think is not as important, but there's actually a bit more to this. PC Colin Perks, it's 1966, and basically as he's rattling doors, as you do in those days, he suddenly becomes aware of a green glow, and he sees across a car park an object, that's the officer, that he describes as that, a typical flying saucer, about 30 feet across. Yeah? It's got a high-pitched whine, about 30 feet in diameter, and then it shoots off after a couple of minutes. Blink of an eye, gone. Now, there's an interesting thing here, that I actually spoke to this officer in retirement, when one of his colleagues contacted me and said, would you like to speak to Colin Perks? Oh yeah, sure would, it's a very famous case. And there's some interesting things, so it's not as clear-cut as what you thought. The officer that contacted me was on the front desk, and he walked in after this sighting, and he says he walked in and he was like, he'd seen a ghost, white as a sheet, really perturbed. They then dispatched 2 uniformed officers to the car park, and when they got to the car park they found that where the object had been seen hovering, underneath where it had been hovering, there was about a ½ inch layer of what was described as like thin shards of fiberglass. Now, in UFO terms, we call this angel hair. There's a residue, it's like fibres, and it quickly evaporates into nothing. Often, worldwide, this has been reported, angel hair. And basically, the 2 uniform officers that went out there weren't thinking straight, because they probably thought, oh, it's nothing UFO, you're stupid, whatever. So they didn't take samples. And by the time they went back to the police station and said, yeah, there was this, well, you should have got a sample. When they went back, it had evaporated and gone. Lost opportunity. But those officers who went to put in statements confirming in writing that that's what they saw. So was this residue. Now, interestingly, a lady, a couple of years after launching the database, probably about 2004, 2005, she said, I lived very close to where this incident occurred. And she said, I didn't know about this, but when I read about it, it resonated, because we were just getting back. She says, I can't be certain it was the same day, but I know it was that kind of year. And basically what happened was, as they were near to this incident, literally 200 metres away, in a housing area, basically they saw this green glow, and she was just getting out of the car. She was a young girl with her father, and her father shouted, run, get in the house. And this green glow of a dish-shaped object was near, and she said it was very, very close to us. Don't know if it's related, might be a totally separate incident, but it kind of has some kind of resonance there. So this case with Colin Perks, there's a 20-page file on him at the record office, and he was investigated because he was a credible police officer, very well respected, and basically they couldn't find any explanation for what he'd seen. And it was really well regarded, even though it was obviously just a single officer. So it's a very famous sighting. This is an officer that came to me. He'd never told his wife about this incident when he came to me, which was about mid-2000s, 2005, 2006. And basically he's driving near Bristol, Lulls Gate, a small private airfield, as was, and literally as they're driving the perimeter fence early hours, suddenly, that's the officer. Now you can't see it, but that's a Photoshop of the actual area where it was, but I think it's just blacked out because of the light. But basically, as they're driving along, the car engine fails, the lights fail, and the police car comes to a stop. An object doesn't come left, doesn't come right, doesn't come down, it just appears. Huge white dish-shaped object no noise, literally just up there. 10 seconds then goes, bulb, light bulb off, gone. Don't go left, don't go right, don't go up, just blinks off. He didn't tell his wife. The only person he confided in was obviously the partner he was sharing the uniform car with at the time, who has since died. And he approaches me and he said, I've been waiting to tell this story for so long. Because until I came along, there's nobody really they could tell because of their job. Not many police officers would come forward. So very interesting case. Oops, what's happened there? Oops, what's happened there? Right, this now, there were two cases in the 1960s. One was Colin Perks, the single officer, which is really the most famous police case in the 60s, along with this case, and this was even more famous, involving two officers, two uniformed officers on patrol. In the southwest, sort of South Wales, Bristol, Devon, that kind of area, there were, for about 3 months, there were a huge number of sightings by members of the public, including police officers. And there was this one that got all the headlines because it was two uniformed officers. They ended up doing a 14-mile chase of a UFO that they described as a Christmas tree effect, okay, a flying cross. And basically they ended up going up to 90 miles an hour, chasing down little country roads, and eventually at the end of this they actually see a second UFO as well of the same description. And they weren't on the telly, it was on, there's a very famous clip of it where they're being interviewed for ITV. Very famous case. A lot of the skeptics just tried to say that they were chasing Venus. But if that was the case, where did the second planet Venus come from at the end? And when they first saw it, before the object started pulling away, it was just above treetop level. And then as they started to speed up, it started to move away, very low, and they chased it all that time. Now, I don't believe anybody can make a mistake for 14 miles. Even if you could momentarily think it was Venus, and Venus can be very prominent, Mars can be very prominent sometimes, you end up with a situation is very quickly you determine what is it. We'll stop, we'll line it up to a lamp post, we'll stop, can we hear anything, whatever, you do something. Yeah? But what people forget is it showed an acceleration, it started to pull away from them, and then a second object was seen. So, can't be Venus. And that's a still of it, and this is what they saw. This is a drawing, and that's the police car. And these are the officers, Roger Lee, Clifford Waycott. But here's another case. We talk about things of what we call defence significance. Now, if you've ever studied this subject, the Ministry of Defence, to date, you know, over 60 years of research, not that they do research it, will say that there has never been a case in Britain of defence significance. And it's a lie. It's an absolute out-and-out lie. It's yes minister talk. It's a play on words. What they really mean is there's never been a case where they've killed us. That's what they really mean in this case. Shot at us, tried to take us away. That's what they're saying. Because it doesn't make sense. As in this case, 1967, two police officers see a UFO over a submarine base. Submarine base, military installation, is that not during the Cold War, 1967? Would that not be of descent significance if a Russian plane flew above that submarine base? Wouldn't it straight away be of defence significance? So it's kind of very clearly illustrates how stupid it is. Stops and hovers, seen for 5 minutes, gone. This is another officer who contacted me directly. He's on patrol, rural area, and he basically gets a message over his radio: look out for some strange objects in the sky. Okay. And sure enough, a few minutes later, he sees 9 pearly shaped objects in an echelon formation flying across the sky. And he can also hear through the radio that other officers from different geographical positions few miles here and there, are viewing the same object at the same time. After the sighting, he's then told to report the next day to his headquarters. When he goes to his headquarters, all the officers, there's 6 officers there, who were in different areas, they're all pulled to one side, interviewed individually from either somebody in the area or perhaps Ministry of Defence, some other strange person, and they're all told, don't say anything about this. Forget about it. Now why would you forget about it if this is all Looney Tunes stuff? Doesn't make sense. It's a great case. This is another case that came to me. Police officer actually I lived in an area that was called Clacton, just outside Wakefield for several years, and this happened within 10 miles of there. And this officer approached me now, lives in France in retirement, and basically he's driving from one police station to another police station on his own in a police car, and he gets to a roundabout, and on the roundabout there is a huge diamond shaped object with a row of windows, a structured object just hovering there. Stops his car, winds the window down as you would, watches it for a couple of minutes, and then it shoots off in the blink of an eye, streaks away towards Wakefield, the biggest town. Now, here's an interesting anecdote to this, is when he told me this, he said, I've got something to confess. He says, when I went back to the police station, the guy in the control room, in those days they used to have local control rooms rather than a big massive one. Alright, so a local guy said, hey, you haven't seen a flying saucer, have you? And he could tell by the way he said it that he was like going to take the mickey. So he went, no, why? Oh, some milkman said he saw a flying saucer a few minutes ago. Now, he never confessed to corroborating the milkman, and it had burned in him all those years. So when he contacted me, he says, I have a real regret about that. He says that poor milkman reported it and must have got absolute mickey taken out of him left, right and centre, and I could have helped him, but I didn't have the ball. And it's a sad indictment, isn't it, when we actually can't tell the truth about something that's you've actually seen and is real, and you're not trying to do anything. So that was an interesting anecdote, and that's the officer, Robert Thomas. Another officer that approached me. Now he worked at the docks, Salford docks. A lot of the police used to police the docks, a separate police. Yeah, so you have your county forces, then you'd have your British Transport Police who would police the railway network, and then you'd have the docks police who would police the docks. Still police officers, exactly the same, no difference. Okay? He was on patrol in one area of his dock when he sees an object, and this is the pattern of the object, and it's making its movement, that's basically like a dish-shaped object just over some amenity blocks, stops and hovers, slowly moves on, total silence, sees it for several minutes. Doesn't report it because he fears ridicule, but fortunately for him, as he was going back in at the end of his shift, his mate, who was on a different dock, said, hey, did you see that thing? And he went, oh yeah, I saw it, yeah. So he got some corroboration, he was allowed to let it out. Another officer approached me, again, in the area where I lived. And he basically is rattling doors, a little village, and it's a rural, kind of a rural village area, and in the distance over fields he sees what is, that's the guy in retirement, he sees, if you can just see there, 3 green lights coming towards him. So it's like 1, 2, missing 3 and 4. And they're coming towards him, no noise, and he's thinking, ah, it's just a plane, it's a bit low. Logical thought processes as you would do. Yeah, but that's very low, that plane. And he's watching it, he's rattling a few doors, and he's thinking, doesn't look like a plane. And then as it gets towards him to a certain point, it then does like a right angle turn and goes, not a plane. 3 green spheres just turn and go, blink of an eye. Why is this guy going to make this kind of story up? Why is he going to approach me and tell me a load of lies? Police officers don't do that. It takes a lot for them to put their head over the parapet, but when they do, you can be damn sure that they're being serious. Now this is a very good case in the sense of this is the second largest incident involving the number of police officers. There are 2 incidents on the database. 70% of all the cases of the 550 cases 70% of them are 2 or more, multiple police witness. So it's not the officer who's tired in the morning, bit mistaken. 2 or more. How many officers in this? 17, from 6 geographical positions. So you've like got a patrol car over there, patrol car 2 miles over there, and it was being tracked, and other officers were saying it will be coming your way, look out for it, look out for it. So they're all passing it on, kind of thing. 17 officers. But the maximum one, which we'll talk about in a bit, involves 24. Same thing. All gave statements. Now this is one of the most famous sightings of the 70s, involving a Sergeant Tony Dodd. And Tony Dodd is interesting because he, like me, he's like I'm a kind of like emulating him. He was older and he served in the North Yorkshire Police, and basically he saw, that's the officer in retirement, and that's what he saw. A very structured disc with windows that flew above his police car. He wasn't on his own, he was PC Allendale, 50 feet above his police car in a rural area called Connolly near Skipton in North Yorkshire. Now this was to have a profound effect on his life, because when he retired he then became a UFO investigator for the very magazine that got me interested, UFO Trooper, UFO magazine. Okay, so there's a tie up there. So he did, in a sense, what he did already. Okay, just took it a bit further. He went on to have several other sightings with colleagues as well. Now this is one of my favourite cases. This is Thames Valley officer called Eric Raymond, now retired, and basically he was with 2 other uniformed officers, 2 police cars, parked up, 3 in the morning, having a chin wag as you did. Yeah, just chatting while anyway, rural location. Then on the in the distance, very briefly, they see a flash on the horizon, but it's so fast they can't, make out really what it is. It's just a bright flash, look, gone. 5 minutes later, this happens. An object the size of a football field, shining a beam down the width of a football field, is scanning the terrain. No noise. Only 500 metres from them in a rural location. They actually go and report it officially. Can you imagine doing that? I'm looking at this weird thing. Yeah? They watch it for 5 minutes. Now as they're watching it, they see smaller objects flying around the main object. And then suddenly after 5 minutes it goes. It'll go left, it'll go right, it'll go up, it just, like a light bulb. Invisible 1 minute, on the next. Very impressive sighting. And that's the officer, PC Eric Raymond. Used to be ex-Met. The most famous case perhaps on the database is this one, because Alan Godfrey is Britain's first recognised alien abductee. Okay? Very famous. He went on with Frank Boff on the BBC, on the telly, on the breakfast programme, sat there on the settee kind of thing. Well, basically what he saw was, he's on his own. It's a very, I could do a whole lecture, and I have done the whole lectures on this case, but cutting a long story short, he goes out, he's on nights, he's on his last patrol before being off at 6. And basically what happens is, the sergeant says, look, take 1 more patrol, looking for, believe it or not, a small herd of cows. It's a rural little town. People had reported during the night on several occasions seeing about half a dozen cows wandering the streets, housing estate, believe it or not. And every time they'd gone out, they could never find them. So they get another call. So just before the shift change, the sergeant says, look, we're going to get crucified if we don't find these cows. Take 1 last patrol. That's, believe me, that's what would happen. So he goes out on his police car and he's about to turn onto this housing estate, when suddenly out the corner of his eye, something on the main road, so he's going to turn right, something out the periphery of his vision makes him think something's going on over there. So he looks, and his first thought is there's a bus skidded across the road. So he doesn't turn right, he carries straight on, and that's the officer, and he sees that hovering in the middle of the road. It's not a bus, it's that. And he drives to within 30 to 50 feet of it. He's hovering 5 feet off the ground, his headlights are reflecting onto the metallic structure. The top half is rotating anti-clockwise, he's got windows, the bottom half is rotating anti-clockwise. No noise. Now, because it's November, late November, and there are trees nearby, it's creating a whirlpool effect, centrifugal force around, bits of twigs around where it's hovering. He gets out the police car. Or rather, he goes, first of all, he doesn't get out the police car at that point, then basically gets his sketchbook, goes for his radio, no, can't get through. Goes for his main set, can't get through. He didn't have mobile phones in those days, so he then gets his sketchbook and starts writing it, sketchpad. Starts drawing it, that's his drawing. Okay, but then a strange thing happens. So he's looking at this object, he's absolutely in awe, and the next thing, he suddenly finds he's driving up the road 100 yards further down the road. It's like there's a time jump. So he's doing this, and then the next minute, he's 100 yards further up the road, spins round, object's gone, but finds a dry patch and the whirlpool of twigs. Yeah? Goes back to the police station and says to the nearest PC, so somebody at the police station says, come with me. Guy called Malcolm Mangley. He says, come with me, I've just seen this flying, so he geared away. Come on. He takes him back, and that officer corroborated the fact that there was this circular patch. He doesn't see the UFO, but he does confirm that he saw this drier patch. Right? Now, the interesting thing about this was, he'd got a brand new pair of boots. He'd literally only had them a few days. When he got home, he found that there was a split on the inside ball of his foot. And he couldn't remember where it had come from. That split, where it was, produced a red mark, which he didn't know what it came from. It was irritable and itching. So he went to his doctors and he got some cream and it went away. Still didn't think really too much about it. Except for, he thought that it was about 10 to 6. And actually it was a lot later. He'd lost about 20 to 30 minutes. What's called missing time. If anybody's ever looked at the abduction phenomena, even though it's portrayed in the media and films very badly, it's actually real in my opinion. Millions of people worldwide, even in third world countries, are experiencing the same thing. So how can somebody who lives in a mud hut in the middle of nowhere, who has no access to television, radio, etc., etc., describe exactly the same events as somebody in the Western world? It means that it's real. Okay? And basically what happens is, he is encouraged to have some hypnosis regression, which he does, and he has 4 sessions, 3 months apart, and the first session is not video recorded, the next 3 sessions are, with 2 different professors at Manchester University, and basically tells the same story each time. And basically the story of his subconscious is that after he's done his sketch plan, he decides to get out the police car. As he walks towards the object, he then starts to get frightened. So he seeks the sanctuary of the car. As he's getting back in the car, he's engulfed in a big bright white light. The next thing he finds himself is laid on a bed with small creatures putting something onto his legs. He's laid on some kind of bed in some kind of structure. The small creatures. Then he sees a tall humanoid figure who says to him telepathically, "You've not to worry about." The next thing is back driving the police car. That was the subconscious memory. Now, what it turns out is that Alan's story was virtually unheard of in this country. There had been 1 or 2 famous cases, Barney and Betty Hill in America, very similar story in 1961, and a guy called Anthony Billis Boas in Brazil in 1957. Okay? But basically in this country nobody ever heard of it. Alright, and then of course when the X-Files begins, and we are always seeing alien heads then, aren't we? And it's like they come now imprinted into our iconography. Yeah, that's what we think, alien greys. But basically, cutting a long story short, there's a lot of evidence to say he was our first recognised case. A very credible person, well respected by his colleagues, and what you didn't realise is that there were several other officers that night who had UFO sightings, not where he was, but nearby, within minutes, and in fact 5 minutes before his sighting, the school caretaker has gone on record on camera to say that he saw an object just above the school that he was opening up 5 minutes before, and in the same area where Alan would be. Okay, so there's strong circumstantial evidence to say there was something very strange going on. Okay, this is an absolutely brilliant case, and what I can tell you on here, this is the Met helicopter. Okay, now I've got a big expose in the book on this, because basically what happened was, with police helicopters you usually have a police spotter who's a uniformed officer, the pilot, and then sometimes a civilian as well. Might only just be the two, the pilot and the police spotter. Well, in this case there was a civilian in the helicopter at the same time, and he gave me one side of the story, but he wasn't a police officer, but it was about a police incident, so it was on the database. Now, as happens, as I'm writing my book, I read in another book the police officer who was the police spotter, and he's gone on record giving his account, so when you put them together you have a very fascinating account. And basically there was a 3 to 4 foot disc seen over parts of London that they were chasing, that was going around the helicopter. It's a really good case, and the fact that we've now got the other than the pilot, we've got the two people, it's really good. All on radar. PC Stanley Osborne, can you imagine, you're sat on the police traffic, we've all seen it as we whiz by, and there's a police car parked up at the side, and you think, oh God, slow down. They're sat there, 3 in the morning, and suddenly, on the opposite lane, with no traffic, an object about 30 foot long just sails past them, about 10 feet off the ground. Like a missile, cruise missile, total silent. Can you imagine that, 2 police officers? Well, this guy, PC Stanley Osborne, that's him, he came forward to see that. Another one, we talk about radar. This is evidence that would stand up in a court of law. Manchester Airport find an object that's static, not moving, radar return. They contact Kidlington Police and say, can you send some officers to a near high vantage point? We'll give you the coordinates. Can you see if there's anything hovering there? So the 2 officers going out there, no doubt thinking they're all crazy, actually see an object that they see for 2 hours, and it's shining beams out of the ground. Wasn't recorded, all the police officers came out, which is a bit crazy, they didn't get the TV out, but they confirmed it, gave statements, and surprisingly the superintendent, Peter Grocott, their superintendent, which is rare for a senior officer, he confirmed that these officers don't make things look like this, and corroborated that they're very fine officers. Alright? Unusual. This case has 24 police officers, tracked over 6 counties of Britain, generally over the southwest, moving down from the north in a southwesterly direction. 24 officers. This sighting at Stonehenge. How many times have you seen footage of the peace protesters, kind of like new agey kind of people camping outside, the summer solstice, things like that? Some of you may have actually been there, right? But basically these 12 officers, uniformed officers, had been, that's him, had been dispatched to go there in case people turned up for the summer solstice. And he's there waiting, and actually nobody turns up, so there's like 12 of them going, well, we'll just hang away here all night, kind of thing. And they're by the monument, and then suddenly one in the crowd goes, hey, what's that? And as they look up, they see this object doing this, like a grid pattern. You know, like a castle turret, right angle turns. We can't do that. So that officer went on record for the UFO Hunters program. This is a famous one. Basically, this is a video, right? But it's not a video, this is a still from the video. But basically, you have the traffic cars and they've got the forward-facing cameras. And this is the camera lights, that's not the UFO. And basically, it shows this clip, and he's driving on his road, and he goes round the corner, and suddenly over a hillside, this is in North Yorkshire, there is what looks like on the camera a light flickering above the hillside. Now when the actual officer was interviewed, he actually said it wasn't a light, it was a cluster of spheres, white spheres all together packed, like a golf ball kind of thing, all together, and it was just hovering, and you see it on the hill, but you don't get the definition. He sent that in anonymously. Now here's an interesting one again. We talk about the MOD and how they lie to us. They actually would put police officer cases as credible witnesses, and they'd mark them up. And you look, you know, they've been releasing all these documents for a few years. Most of it's low-level stuff, but in amongst it, there's some good stuff, and they're what's called loose minutes. Yeah, and basically, it's internal chatter within the MOD. So a credible witness, and basically a helicopter crew had seen it. So on the one day, on the 17th of November, they're saying, "Oh, this is interesting, credible witness." within 24 hours they're saying no defence significance. Even though the helicopter crew had seen it and police officers on the ground had seen it. No defence significance. They just make it up as they go along. And this is the next day, telling about the incident, confirmed on radar, no defence significance. Cases that got away. Sometimes police officers approached me or told me about other police officers who had sightings. Now, as an interesting scenario, there was one guy, and in fact it was Alan Godfrey, the guy who was the abductee, that famous case. He said this guy in the police station at Halifax always used to say that he'd had a sighting with his wife down at Derwent Water, you know, where you've seen the Lancaster bomber going over there doing the dam busters, that kind of scenario, over the water. They were down having a picnic, off duty. That's the story when this UFO flew over the reservoir. He says, give him a call. So he gives me his number, I ring him, he goes, I don't want to talk about it. Now most of the time police officers are very open to me, but occasionally some officers are too traumatised by what they've seen and they just can't deal with it, can't come to terms with it. And he was one of those. And so even though it was a well-known sighting within the police station, he said these interesting words: I don't want to talk about it. Now when somebody says to you, I don't want to talk about it, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It just means he doesn't want to talk about it. So he no doubt had an experience, but he couldn't face dealing with it. And that occasion happens. Another police officer contacts me and he goes, I was a young probationary officer at the time, in his first 2 years, and I was with an experienced officer, and he said, I don't know if I should tell you this. And I could tell that he was sincere. He was on the phone and he was like, I said, well, it's for you, blah, blah, blah. And I could send you a sighting report form and things like this. And basically, he told me snippets, right? And he said, well, I'm not sure I'm ready to go forward. Okay. But basically, he said, in his last email to me, I might tell you one day, but he says, I've still got the burnt clothing. Tell me. Never did come forward. And then this is another one. We're all heard of the crop circles, haven't we? Many crop circles have been seen and lights been seen near crop circles. Okay? And this particular officer who contacted me was a PC who told me about a story his sergeant had told him. And basically the sergeant had been on a high level ground overlooking an area where, as the sun was coming up, he and a colleague saw two white lights dancing in the sky as the sun's coming up, and then they shot off. And as the sun came up and they saw what was below, on the ground below, it was a crop circle. So wouldn't that have been a good one to get on the record? A positive link between police officers and that. And he went back and he says, he won't tell us. He said, I've no doubt he's sincere. I said, well, you can't make him. But those are the kind of cases that you can get. And like I say, the one at Derwent Water was another one. So you can't always get the officer to come forward. But the vast majority do. 550 cases, over 1,000. The book that I'm writing now, it's probably 1,050. Conclusions. Before we have a break. 70% multiple police witness. It's just a flavour of what I've shown you. Only scratch the surface. I believe that a significant proportion of those cases fall into those very classic disc cigars, green glows. You see what I mean? That's why I give you the information first. The way they move, the way they stop and hover, the way they depart, the way they blink off. That's why I tell you how that in the context. So now when you relate them to these sightings, you can go pretty quickly as to determine what they are. And a few of you, as I said, had sightings, perhaps 20, 30 people in the room. Now you go back and evaluate what happened to you, and if they fall into any of those right angle turns, up, straight, down, then you've seen UFO, a genuine UFO. Now you can only see, and that means that you could just see something for 3 or 4 seconds, but if it does this, that's a genuine UFO, because we can't do it. Yeah? So even though it might be a short sighting, those are the parameters that you work with. Yeah? You fall into those categories. So, as we come to our break, and I know that it's very warm, and I'm warm, let's have a cup of tea for 20 minutes and we're back for some videos. Thank you very much. 4. Now, it's very hard in the RAF, and having been in the RAF, for aircraft to hold formation, tight formation, without moving. Yeah? Very difficult. Usually a squadron 9, sometimes 12. But let's look at this. Estimated to be 500 objects holding formation in broad daylight with clouds as definition, moving across the sky. But these aren't balloons, because you can't tether a balloon that's buffeted by the wind. Watch, they're fixed. They're not moving. They're holding formation. This is the largest group ever seen holding formation. Approximately 500 objects, and as they look, I suspect that these are remote probes of some kind, because in amongst these, something is controlling them. There are about 2 or 3 objects within that that are noticeably larger, and I suspect that they're operating or in control of these. But can you see they're not moving, they're just holding formation. Now what can do that? We can't do that. See this one? That appears to be a controller, I suspect. Noticeably bigger, holding formation. It's just repeated. So that's an interesting clip. Now you'd have thought that would be on the 6 o'clock news. Even if you're the most sceptical scientist in the world, you would think somebody would go, that's a very interesting piece of footage, let's study it. Let's find out what it is. Nothing. Doesn't make sense. Right, another large fleet. Huge numbers of objects, but it's not great footage. I think this was over America, and again many hundreds in lines, just large patterns. Again, you'd think somebody would be investigating that. Yeah? Okay, let's look at some others. Right, best fleet videos from Mexico. Right, this is a series of. This is a guy called Jaime Muson, Mexican researcher, and basically you can see these are fixed. You've got clouds moving, but these aren't moving, these are fixed objects, and it's just a selection of spheres.
Some videos of these so-called clusters or fleets that have been recorded through time in Mexico, like this one.
In South America, the attitude to UFOs is almost completely different to that in Europe and America. And that's because they're far more open to these subjects. They haven't had the level of ridicule associated. They've had some, but not the same level. Right, so I'm just going to take it forward a bit. This is another sequence. And they can make, sometimes they'll make formations. And if you look on this one, it almost appears to make a formation like a Z in the sky. And for those people that think that crop circles are just man-made, that is not true. They estimate that 95% of the crop circles now are man-made by professional circle makers, people who go out and do geographical patterns. However, there are about 5% every year that defy explanation. And what makes them different is that if you're in the crop circle, there are some physical changes. If you look closely at the knuckle of wheat, and it's not just wheat by the way, it happens in barley and other things, but in wheat the knuckle is blown out and like burnt from the inside out, okay? And when you look at that, that means that it's been exposed to some kind of like microwave heat. It's had a burst of energy that has popped it from the inside. So there's been a massive burst of energy. Now what scientists think is that when the pattern is laid, it's laid literally in a matter of seconds. It's like power surge, burns it into the whatever crop it is. Yeah.
This recorded 21st of June 2004 over Cuernavaca near
Now if this were balloons, you've got so much cloud here, you can see the broad daylight, you'd see that they've been moved, but you can see that they're fixed in broad daylight.
All of them moving together, making a formation, moving in the same direction.
There's a particular clip that I like, what's called a moving fleet one. Now that's some slight movement going on there. Fixed one, top one's fixed, second one's underneath. That's the Guadalajara again, which is spectacular.
Okay, to explain that.
That's the larger object that seems to be controlling.
Yes.
But there's a sequence at the end of this. Now you see this here, and it's almost kind of like a horseshoe shape. I've got a clip, and if I've got it with me I'll show you it, where 6 objects move in the dark sky over Fleetwood in Lancashire. It's rarely ever seen because I've got the footage, they've given me permission to use it, but basically it's the best night footage I've ever seen. 6 objects come into the view, they make formations above rooftops with the rooftops clearly in perspective so you can work out distances, sizes, and then they go back out the way they came in. And they make that horseshoe very similar. I think it's this one that I like. This is a moving fleet, if it's the one I'm thinking of. And it is. Look how many, in the way that they're moving. Right, now as they zoom in, you'll see groups of 2s and 3s suddenly speed up and start making manoeuvres. Watch for little groups separate and move across. We're going to zoom in a minute. And unfortunately there's a lot of cloud about, but watch it zooming in now and watch these groups start moving into position. Now these aren't birds, these are spheres. Birds flutter. Their wings flutter, strike the light, so they're dark light, dark light. These are just constant. Alright? Now what they do is, just, watch this group now, just speeding up. And if you then see it before it goes into cloud, it also almost makes an anchor shape. Central, with a, like an anchor position at the bottom. You'll just see it as it goes into cloud. You'll see what I mean about the anchor. Keep an eye on it. I don't know if you can see it from there, but you'll see it go like an anchor. But it's quite spectacular the way they move. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right. Now this. All right. Do you want to see that Lancashire one? It's about 10 minutes long, but it's worth it. I think it's the best nighttime footage I've ever seen, and I see a lot of stuff. Okay. Put it into context. The whole of it lasts about 26 minutes. And basically, what happened was that a guy who was useless at video photography, people are out in the street, what's that strange light, what are they? And you can hear on the commentary them shout, hey, go get Tom from next door. All normal things that you would do if something strange was going on. But most cameras are set on automatic focus, which means is that they automatically focus, and if they can't quite get the focus, it keeps blurring in and out. And it's a pain in the ass because they should put it on manual focus. And this guy wasn't a professional photographer or anything, so the first 10 minutes of his footage is blurred in, out, and does your editing. So the main sequence is the sequence I'm going to show you, right? But this is the best nighttime footage, and this should be on the 6 o'clock news, in my opinion. Right, so straight away what you're going to see, you're doing a bit of this blurring straight off, but what you're going to focus in on is these 3 lights. That's 3 UFOs holding formation, and you see this bright glow is a street lamp. You know how street lamps distort things, so keep in mind the position of these in relation to this street lamp. Okay, so it's already been going, this filming, for 8 minutes 52. Now look, these are houses, street lamp, so you've got perspective, alright, and you think there's just 3. Keep an eye on it, because in a minute it does a bit of focusing in and out, poor photography, and then what you're going to see is suddenly there's another 3 objects come this side of the orange light, and they're going to move over towards these 3 that are already there. Now bear in mind this is an ordinary street, and at various shots you will see the rooftops, the apex of the rooftop, so some physicist, mathematician would be able to work out precise sizes, dimensions, etc., heights. And look, these three have effectively come from beyond the light and are now going to move over. So these three are moving from right to left to join these three. Okay? This is important because when they leave, they go out the same way. So you watch, and this is all very slow over rooftops, and at various times you'll see them pull back, so you get this perspective, which makes it spectacular. Because most people see objects, they don't get any reference points. You need a tree in it, you need a bit of a horizon on it, so you can put it in perspective. And you can see that these are slowly moving towards these. Now this angle has just started to change because this object, having watched it many times, is going to move over here. And this is the leader in this particular sequence.
It's in the computer drawer, left-hand drawer.
Just ordinary human footage. At one point he goes, "The dog's sick." But that's brilliant testimony. Does that make sense? It's brilliant testimony. That's what you'd expect. Oh, go get Bill from next door. Perfect testimony. See how they're making the gap up? Moving over there. Watch, this one now is moving over. And I said about the horseshoe in one of those previous clips. They're going to make an identical sequence, which is a bit of a coincidence. So these three are now moving, and that they're going to start making a horseshoe now. Just these five. Behind this is the leader. Now, have we got microlight formation teams? Microlights have little engines. This is low. There's no noise. You can hear road noise, there's nothing. See how they're making a pattern now? Moving across, following the leader, and they're going to make this almost perfect horseshoe. His photography is rubbish, he's the first one to acknowledge that. Alright, what a perspective that is. The apex of the roof. Light. What a shot that is. Some clever person could work that out. See how they've manoeuvred into formation? Now this is an actual aircraft that flies through the formation, or very close to it. Might be a police helicopter, it'd be nice, wouldn't it? But something flew through it, and that was a plane. And that's what a plane looks like, because planes have got to have flashing navigation lights. You see how it's made the perfect horseshoe? And it's more or less flying past these discs, these spheres. So that is being surveilled by whatever aircraft that is. So they know what's happening there. Now, what these are going to do is start moving up and chasing. So they've come in from this way, and now they're coming back on the same track. But now they do what I call the domino effect. They make, like if you pick up a domino, 1, 3 and a 2. Imagine the diagonals. That's what they almost make. Perfect alignments of a 1, a 3 and a 2. And you'll see them get into line. So you're going to see almost get into perfect 1, 3, 2. And these kind of patterns are seen quite regularly.
But that lamppost is making the light is affecting it.
So you know what I mean? The 1, the 3 and the 2, it's lining itself up. And there's people all out in the street. This doesn't make the news. Why not?
Yeah.
And they follow that one out. But this is the best part of the sequence. But this is already a good 5 minutes into it. And eventually they just go out back that way. What a great bit of manoeuvring with rooftops and everything. That should be on the news. Somebody should be investigating this. Even if you're not a UFO believer or if you're a skeptic, somebody should be analysing it to say what it is or what it is not. Doesn't make sense. Nobody pays any attention. Good little clip.
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen as genuine a clip as that. And these are I can vouch for these people. I've met them and studied the case. Very genuine people. And she actually ran a children's creche, and she was very reluctant to be in the newspapers because she said, "I'll lose all my clients." If she's looking after young kids, somebody will say, "Oh, they're crazy. They believe in UFOs." So you can see powerful reasons. Right now. It's not just worldwide that we have some sightings. We have had some fantastic footage in the UK, but you haven't seen it. But I have. Look at this. Now this is ultimately one of the best clips I've ever seen in daylight of a strange object. Because I met the guy, it was filmed over Portsmouth, he had a bad heart, couldn't work, so he wasn't very old, in his 40s, but he had a bad heart, so he basically couldn't work, and his hobby was basically, I'll go out in the garden and just film the sky. But he was strange, and you get some people who have some strange kind of feeling to go outside and film. And this is not just a one-off. If it was a one-off, you'd put it down as just a one-off. But I've actually met quite a lot of people who get a feeling in the pit of the stomach, go outside, you might be able to see some. And they go out and they do. And they're kind of like called repeaters. Something tells them they're going to have an experience. Quite how, I don't know, but those people exist. And this guy was one of them. Over a 3-year period, he filmed over 200 sequences in broad daylight. And he took them to UFO magazine, the printed magazine that got my interest all those years ago. And I was one of the very first people to see this footage, and the first generation. This is not a first generation VHS copy, but it's still spectacular. This is part of what was a 4-minute sequence, and it's basically a red, I call it a red flying earring. Yeah, if you think a part of an earring, that kind of shape, not fully circle, a part of an earring hanging off your ear, and this is red, and it's got lights pulsing on it, and watch for it. When it pulses, you see 2 lights on it, but what you also see is it's rotating on its own axis. So 1 minute the earring's pointing that way, and then it turns round, then it comes back again. No obvious sound, nothing to keep it up in the engine wise, but what you'll see is that it's got 2 lights on it. But when it pulses, at one point to 5 lights, watch for the gap. If that's the earring, a letter C kind of thing, the bit between the gap, when it pulses, watch that morph, and that fills in. It changes shape. Really quite dramatic. There we go. This was taken over Portsmouth. Right, you see it's rotating on its axis, you can see that it's like an earring shape. Watch it as it turns now. It's got the 2 lights, watch it morph when it pulses more, and watch that gap in the earring. Whoop. And then watch it when it pulses to 5, it's changed shape. You physically see it change shape. 4 minutes, and this was only about 300 feet high. And later on in the 4-minute sequence, you'll see it as it moves over trees, as it's going further away and getting smaller. Isn't that a weird object? That should be on 6 o'clock news, shouldn't it? What's that? Somebody should be investigating that, but they're not. Why? It would make sense. What rotates on its axis? Now, I was part of a documentary when this documentary came out, which was the last thing that Graham Birdsall ever did before he died of a brain hemorrhage. And so it didn't get the exposure it should have, because he died. But basically, they got a guy in who was a physicist, a mathematician, to look at this, and he says, I can't understand what that is. How does it stay in the air? How comes it can rotate on its own axis? But it's a 4-minute long sequence. Brilliant sequence. When I saw the highest quality definition, brilliant, on a big screen. Marvellous. Okay, here's another sequence. Let's talk about intelligence of spheres. Again, taken by a guy called Anthony Woods, who took the last sequence. Broad daylight. Thing to note is here is intelligent movement. That's hovering. We know it's hovering because in relation to that it's the same, but keep an eye on this object. This is follow my leader. This one's coming up from underneath. This is showing intelligent movement. It's going to come up and join it, and then it's going to move to the right, and then they're both going to go off to the side. If this isn't intelligent movement, I don't know what it is. One hovering, one joining up with it, and then it's going to move to the right. And you can see, because of the relation of the clouds, that one is hovering, that was caught up, and then later on in this sequence, they then go out together as a pair. Coming out that way. Good little footage, isn't it? As I say, I'm one of the very few people who've seen all these clips. Okay, right, let me give you a little quick 5-minute documentary that I did. And I don't have the time to do any, although editing does fascinate me. Well, this is about spheres, and if you like Hans Zimmer, the musicians, Last Samurai soundtrack, he's one of my favourite composers. This is what you don't see on the news. I don't know what the sound will play like on this, but it's generally. But this is about fleet sequences and the history of fleets. And the music's from The Last Samurai. It's beautiful. It's that same sequence again, 2002. I've tried to be dramatic with the music to match the next bit. You let me know how it works. This is that clip that I've just shown you. The intelligent movement. Now we're going to go into the history of spheres from the earliest time it was first seen, which is 1950. It's exciting. This was taken in 1952, Tremonton, Utah, and basically a professional photographer with his cinefilm captured spheres. Now interestingly, when the Air Force took it away, they returned it back with some of the best bits missing. Now this was filmed by, again, a bad heart guy. It's the same thing, no different. So all these years later, just the same. But you don't get to see this on the news, why not? See how that one's speeded up? The others remain, that one's suddenly just speeded up. Now if you actually look on that sequence carefully, you'll see objects that suddenly just appear out of nowhere. It's like they've come through a portal, just become visible. Not birds, self-illuminating. That piece of footage was kept secret for 4 years until 1956. Think about this. I'll talk about the secrecy and where it came from in a minute. At the very least, they should be studied. Do you like that? It's a lovely soundtrack, by the way. Right, okay. Now let's look at some space footage. Oh, right. Now, over the last few years, I have become interested in what's called night vision photography and infrared photography. And basically what that means is that I would say that any one of us in this room will see UFOs if you buy a £350 night vision pair of binoculars, yeah, which links to a video recorder and a hard drive. You can record the sequences. And I'm going to show you a sequence that I recorded of 3 objects moving in formation. Okay, and I've got many others, but I just haven't had time to edit them. Recently, I've got a really good video camera which has now got an infrared lens attached to it. And basically what that is, infrared, basically what it means is that our eyes only operate on a certain level. We can't see the infrared. So with night vision it picks up things that we can't see, brings the stars more prominent. Yeah? In daytime the infrared lens are usually green, sometimes blue, so it makes everything green, but it's crystal clear sharp. And the idea is I believe that there are things that you can see in the infrared that are moving around in our airspace that we can't visually see with our ordinary eyes. So I've started to do a bit of a research on it, and so in my study, I'm very lucky, I've moved to a house now that just looks out at the hillsides, got a beautiful landscape view kind of thing. I just set the video running when it's nice clear blue sky and just let it film, and then I take out the SD card later on and review it when it's dark and shuttle it across and see if there's any anomalies. Well, I'm finding anomalies, and if I was to come back here in a year's time, I'm going to have a whole list of these, and I'm already getting some brilliant sequences. The best sequence I've got so far, in broad daylight, crystal clear blue sky, literally at an angle. If I'm sat here, it's up there. It doesn't appear to be that high, but what you see with this particular camera is it's got 2 cameras. If you can imagine looking at the full face of the camera, if the bottom left hand corner, quarter, you've got a picture in picture. So 3/4 of it is green, and it's also got in the bottom left hand corner ordinary vision, blue sky, what everybody looks at. So it's got 2 cameras. So you turn it around so it's filming the same thing, and you've just got a smaller version in normal vision on the bottom left hand corner. And basically what I've recorded in one sequence is that against the clear blue sky, an object suddenly that you see in the green but not in the blue suddenly starts moving, and then it starts to get brighter, and when it gets really bright it suddenly becomes visible in the normal daylight spectrum, blue sky. You see it briefly, but then it does something really strange that means that it's not a balloon, it's not an atmospheric or anything. It goes blip blip, it sends out another light beam, and it's a really weird little sequence. But what it's proven is I'm already picking up odd objects. But night vision, let's go to night vision. Believe it or not, the very first time I used my set of Yukon Night Ranger, it cost about £350, and the reason why I got those is because they've got a video out facility, so you can link it to a laptop and record, yeah, the sequence, which is important. And this is what I saw the first time, and it was recorded on the 27th of August 2011. Now, before I moved house, I lived in Holmford, and it's basically, Holmford is like that. Everybody who's got a garden, it's a steep tiered garden kind of thing, with the main town at the bottom. So I'm on the top of my decking, I set all the camera up. First time, my stepson happened to be with me, and he's not interested in UFOs at all. He's mid-20s at this point. And basically, what I've done is I've put the camera on the tripod, the actual binoculars on the tripod, aimed it upward, the video out into a video recorder facility on my laptop, and so all I'm doing is just panning. I'm not actually looking like that because it hurts your eyes after a while. It's an easy way to do it. You link it up to your tripod, and I'm just panning the sky. And of course, because it's night vision, it's bringing up loads of stars that you don't ordinarily see. I'm looking around, I see these 3 objects. Well, I see 2 objects. When I play it back, I realise that there's a 3rd object that fades very quickly, but is moving. So the first 2 or 3 seconds of this clip, look for an object, and I'll show you where it is, but it's with him, right? And I happen to say, well, I start tracking them, and I happen to say to my stepson, just have a look over there somewhere and see if there's any, you can see any lights in the sky. And he went, yeah. I went, what? Because I didn't think he'd see them. And I looked and I got a quick look visual of two objects that were stacked on top of each other like that. Now in the Air Force, planes don't fly on top of each other, stacked like that, going across the sky, one on top of each other, like that. And they're like almost tethered, but they're not, because you can see stars between. But this is what we saw that first time, and I was amazed. And this is a 4-minute sequence, and it doesn't say, right, now just watch this object. I'm going to show it again. There's an object just here that's moving. I'm going to play it again. So, when you see the two bright objects, look to the left of it. Okay? And it's just there. There's an object moving very slowly behind these two. And I go away for a bit, and then we just concentrate on these two. Now planes don't fly like that, stacked on top of each other like that. And I've got many sequences like this. But this last 4 minutes, no noise whatsoever, and these weren't at high altitude like satellites. These were maybe 5,000–10,000 feet. They're there. They're not way up high. And obviously all the rest are stars. And they just glide on, very bright. Now subsequently, since this, I've actually got a sequence of 3 that stay as a 3. Not quite as bright, but they are a 3. But these are incredibly bright, moving across the stars for 4 minutes, and then what happens is that one blinks off, fades, and that one goes. Now it almost looks like they're tethered, they're like together, but there's nothing there. You can see the stars between them. So these are 2 separate objects. And gradually this one moves a bit over, and then eventually they start kind of like moving down as a pair. We're down here, and then that one disappears and that one disappears. But since then, sometimes it's been a mixture of that, and sometimes it's on a tripod. But I've seen a group of 9 objects, 9 spheres, just through binoculars. Didn't have it recorded, but I saw a group of 9 objects. If you think of the letter Y, now turn it upside down, it was an upside down Y formation moving across the sky very fast. Not birds, not flickering, 9 spheres like you saw on those bits before. Now, with night vision, if it's a plane, any light, navigation light, which all planes have got to have, is exaggerated. So on night vision it really picks up on any kind of light. So when it flashes, even though it might be a tiny light, it gives a lot of illumination. And you can see that there's no light. That's a star flickering. But there's no illumination on this other than a fixed bright light. But these kind of objects are seen regularly. Now I was reviewing some of the footage that I took for ages ago. I found this file that I'd taken on a certain day, and there was like 10 clips. And I was reviewing it last night, and over an 8 minute, see this object's moving quickly there. There's an object just moving. Right? You will find these objects. Now, people will go, well, it's a satellite. Well, alright, well, satellites are supposed to go around the Earth anti-clockwise. And of course, all they're doing is an orbit, essentially a perfect circle each time. Now, the only thing that can happen is that they can change their angle slightly, but they're still doing a circle. They can't make left turns or anything like that. So, when you watch these kind of sequences, you see objects going that way, up, down. So they can't all be satellites. They're going the wrong way. So if you go, well, that's a satellite. Oh, so then you get one going the other way. Well, that can't be a satellite then. So it can only then be a plane or a balloon or something like that. But they're not moving like balloons. Yeah, it's starting to fade. That one's going to blink out. And what we think what that is even though you can have absolutely pristine, no clouds, lovely, balmy night, what we think is that they just kind of press a switch and they become invisible, for want of a better word. Similarly, I was watching a clip last night, and sometimes you miss things because they happen very quick. And I was watching a clip, nighttime clip like this, and suddenly an object against the background of stars suddenly appears from nowhere, does this for about 3 seconds and then disappears. glows bright and it disappears. And it's not a meteorite. The meteorites go shooting star, burn up in the atmosphere. Nothing like it. These are slow. Sometimes you can just get objects doing this. Really slow, like meandering, like they fall out. If it was a plane, it would fall out of the sky. It's moving that slow. Some almost look like they stop. But there's definitely something to night vision and infrared. So what I'm saying is, if you're interested enough, it's a sure way to see things. And there should be major research on that. Right. What time is it now? Anybody give a time, please?
Just gone 10.
Sorry, what time is it?
Just gone 10.
Just gone 10. What time am I allowed to keep you here till?
You're still alright, but we're okay.
Alright, let me show you another couple of space clips. Right, this is STS-48.
Photograph and measure atmospheric conditions.
Some of you will have seen this, a lot of you will have seen it.
doing that too.
Of course, when we talk about space footage,
say it's already happened.
it's not me and you that's taking this
footage
footage.
taken on board the shuttle Discovery.
This is footage taken by NASA. That's not CGI. That can't be manipulated other than by them. So watch this do a right angle turn. Now believe it or not, all of these objects are UFOs, because they're all moving slightly. But this object,
The space battle.
right, I'm going to show that again. Did you see it? Did you watch it again?
Watch again as the intergalactic invaders
gonna-
engage warp
It's going to do a right angle
water
turn and go
force
out into space. Watch.
Obviously, the force is not with us.
Poof, flash. Does a
There is
right angle
no
turn
explanation.
out into space. And then a flash comes behind it.
And
You know what
that
the
very
thing that is?
same
Star
physical
Wars.
process that caused
Right,
the
that's
space
it.
battle is behind the comet that's overhead tonight. The brightest comet in the last.
So what we think that is you know, Reagan tried to develop Star Wars. I think there was some reasons for that, and we think UFOs was one of them. But that, we think that's like a test. An object seen, there's a flash, but it moves before it can get hit. Because it actually stops and then does a right angle turn. Yeah? And then the flash comes behind it. Okay, let's look at another sequence here from space. Object comes very quickly into screen and then slows down. Meteor, it won't slow down, it just keep going. And it kind of takes up a position. Now see how many other objects that you start. See this one going like this? It's like a fishtail movement. Yeah, this one down here. This one over here. This one over here. Fast streaks coming across there. And what this is when they zoom in on it to try to obscure it. As soon as anybody sees anything good in space, they usually try to distort the image. Alright? Another streaking object. And there are some amazing clips over the years of objects seen. Suddenly just appearing and then moving. Okay?
At an altitude of about 124 statute miles,
See that?
etc.
See it?
At an altitude of about 124
Keep
statute
quick.
miles, etc. At an altitude of about 124 statute miles, etc.
Now, over the years, there's been lots of clips where they've actually flown past Mir, just pulsed, gone slowly past. Nobody makes reference to them. There's some really amazing clips. Let's see. I won't keep it too long. Right. Oh, right. Going back to. Oh, this is a good one. Of a sphere that comes towards. Genuine clip. What's that? Going across the moon's surface. What's that? And if you look closely, it's rotating. Let's check out. Watch that. Now, when they were going over the moon, occasionally from the moon's surface, as the lunar modules are going over, they get flashes from the ground. Why are you not told about this? Nobody's there. You know, this is their own footage. Well, we can't do that. What's that? Typical sphere. There's lots of clips like this. This is a famous clip that they try to say is like a piece of fluff on the flow, but if you study UFOs, this is a typical sphere. Now, if you think about historically, UFOs turn up near high technology. The Concorde, when it came in, was a very space-age design aircraft, supersonic aircraft. So you'd think that UFOs might be interested in this new technology. This is a clip that they tried to dismiss. So this is on one of its test runs.
In the skies above Britain.
See that object? It comes down, drops along, goes alongside of it, and then goes. Now they tried to say that's an error. But when we look at what we've got now over the years, see these two? This is the first major TV cine clip anywhere, 1950.
And this in the skies above you.
Yeah. So I'll just show you that clip again of the two, because that first clip is quite amazing. So this object's going to drop down. It's going to show an interest. It's going to move up, and watch the shadow. There's actually a shadow reflected on that. These are two objects going past a water tower. Again, the footage was taken in broad daylight. The guy filmed it, and the Air Force took it away and gave him it back, minus the best few clips. The first part of the footage, when it was nearest. Yeah? Here's the spheres again. Now often these objects are seen and they've got something dangling underneath them. But they're not balloons. They have something like a tether underneath. That's that Guadalajara sighting again, with the controlling, what we think is a controlling object there. This is over, good sequence, this is over Islington. And it's 12 objects just going above the sky, but they're holding formation. Now, some people will say this is sky lanterns, but sky lanterns are still governed by the wind. They can't hold formation, but if you look in this, it's absolutely fixed for all the time you see it. When you're in the air, they have thermals, so you cannot control where the thermal goes. Yeah? So I think that's quite an interesting Islington sighting. Okay. Right, anybody, right, how many people in the room have heard of an incident called the Tehran incident? Put your hands up if you've heard of it. 3 of you, 4 of you. So not many, so I'll tell you the story, 5 of you. Right.
Was it in the 70s or?
Yeah, 70s, 1976. And basically what happened in Tehran, this is one of those great military pilot ones. And it's well worth telling the story because the guy went on record. At the time I think he was a lieutenant, but he retired as a general, which is a pretty high rank to go forward with his sighting. But basically what happened was, air traffic control tower in Tehran see an object that's hovering near the runway. It's just stationary. It's confirmed on radar as an unknown target. Return. The general in the air traffic control tower, he actually looks at it visually through binoculars, so aided vision. Please continue. Buggers out there. And basically, all the people in the air traffic control tower see it visually. And then what happens is they decide to send up an F-4 Phantom jet, military jet, to go towards it, see what it is. As it takes off, the object then starts moving away at a fast speed. And basically the pilot starts chasing it, the object speeds up. The object gets away from him, but when he's within 25 miles of it, as he's chasing, as soon as he gets to within 25 miles, all of his computer screens go dead. It's like somebody switched them off. And he has to abandon the chase and turn around. As soon as he turns around away from the object, he gets all his power back on his screens. They then send up another F-4 Phantom. And this guy is called, now retired, General Parviz Jafari. Now as he's getting towards it, he doesn't lose instruments, but basically as he gets towards it, he then gets a visual, which is a diamond-shaped object that's going away from him at speed, and it's pulsing a set sequence of 4 colours. Then something dramatic happens. Can you imagine you're chasing this object when suddenly the object in front of him dispatches like a missile straight at him on collision speed? It's not a missile, it's just a red sphere. Comes out from the back of the object, the UFO, comes at him at collision speed, so fast that he thinks he's going to die. When he goes to use his weapon system, in that split second, his weapon system mysteriously jams, and then he thinks he's going to die with the impact, and then suddenly at the last minute it's gone down the side. The object flies around his plane and then goes back to the main object and merges it into it. Seamlessly merges back into it like we do with normal aircraft. Not. Yes? And then, as he's chasing, a green sphere is then drops from underneath it and illuminates the ground like it's daylight as it's going down towards the ground. And he fears there's going to be an explosion, but it appears to land or hover very close to land. He flies over it, the object then suddenly goes like that, takes off at speed, he can't get anywhere near it. End of story. I'm cutting a lot out here because of the time. But basically it's a fantastic story, and that pilot is this guy. So General Parviz Jafari from the Iranian Air Force. We talk about witness testimony. Are we going to get much better than this guy? Would it stand up in a court of law? Yes, it would. Would his testimony backed up by the radar data, multiple officers, and he's appearing in Washington DC?
I'm a retired general of Iranian Air Force.
Now I've spoken at the National Press Club in Washington, and it's a very prestigious place, and it's amazing that somebody of his rank has gone public like that.
By circling of an unknown object.
So I just wanted to show you that these people exist. It's not just me talking and making things up. These people are real. Now, I think I'm only going to show you one more little sequence, which is this. How many people have heard of the Star Child skull? A few, or quite a few of you, right? For those that haven't, people have looked over the years for any kind of strange skull. Is there anything that says there's an alien human skull, hybrid skull? Well, this skull that we're going to show you now is it's like a little 10-minute sequence, but it's one of the best 10 minutes of factual data you'll ever see on this mysterious skull. It's 900 years old, carbon dated to 900 years old. But one of the things to remember here is that this skull, I looked for evidence, has over 25, I think at least 25 physiological differences from a human skull. It's unique. 25 physiological differences, even under a big electron microscope. Yeah? There are strange fibres inside that are unknown to humans. So it's just a little interesting bit of what I think factual data. Now the guy who did it was a guy called Lloyd Pye. He sadly died of cancer a couple of years ago. So I'm not quite sure where the research is going, but he was very close to having a full DNA that said that this is an alien human hybrid.
Against the National Institute of Health database, they found a significant number of coherent base pairs that have never been seen before. This was an historic moment for science, as it proved beyond all reasonable doubt that part of the skull's DNA is not human. Since that result, the geneticists have predicted that when the final genome recovery is complete, it will provide science with the first record of alien DNA ever discovered. The skull's caretaker is Lloyd Pye. Lloyd, a researcher in aspects of human origins, named it the Star Child. It was found in Mexico in the 1930s. Through carbon dating, we know that the skull is over 900 years old. It has over 24 major physiological
like your teeth, like enamel, the whole skull's enamel.
These are the cuts in the skulls for DNA testing, and you see the distortion.
I've held a replica, perfect replica, and it's so different. It's like touching a tooth, and it's a third lighter than a human skull. A third lighter, but so much stronger because of the enamel.
In the bone throughout, uniformly, it's different.
This is the biochemistry of the typical human bone. Its calcium and phosphorus levels are high, and its oxygen and carbon levels are low. But with the Star Child, it's quite different. The phosphorus is down, and the carbon and oxygen are up, indicating its biochemistry is more like tooth enamel than regular bone.
This is a scanning electron microscope view of the bone. And this is the way bone is created. You have the cortical layer here, and in here are the cancellous holes where the bone marrow moves. And coming out of some of the cancellous holes, but also embedded in the matrix of the bone are these fibers, these very durable.
Don't exist in human skulls anywhere.
That
never been found.
Nobody's ever seen before. They're in no other species, and we don't really know what they are. But we just know that they're really durable because the.
So from a detective's point of view, this is interesting. This is all physiological evidence that says that there's something very unique about
this.
this.
It tells you they have a high resistance factor to the blade.
It lacks frontal sinuses, has smaller chewing muscles, and is missing an ilium. Instead, its neck connects on top of its frame and magnum opening, indicating that its neck is about half the size of a normal human neck.
And here we see one clearly embedded in the matrix of the bone on the surface. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And you know what science says about this? You probably dropped it on a carpet and it picked up carpet fibers. You know, I mean, really, that is the answer that I get. It has to be just fibers off a carpet or something. This can't be. It really
People
can't
trying to
be.
say that the skull's deformation through illness, swollen head, you know, progeria, things like that.
With the Star Child.
But these physiological
When one of the
changes
teeth was
are
extracted,
different,
it
so
was
they
found to
can't be
have
that.
very heavy roots,
Never been seen
indicating
before.
he was an adult when it died. When the maxilla was x-rayed, a staggering 5 more teeth were discovered, waiting to come down.
The key is that normal human bone, when you die, there are bacteria in your body that scour and eat every bit of your marrow out, and they leave your bone polished, shining, just like this, just like you see. You could eat out of that, just like the bacteria did. It's so clean. There is no marrow left anywhere, and this is the way it is with all animals when they die. With a star child, we see a big difference, and we also see a difference in the color too. It's much more milkier than that alabaster look of the human bone because it's got so much more collagen. But you see this red residue
Doesn't exist in human.
everywhere.
This
We
red
don't
residue.
know what that is. Never seen it before. It's not in any other species. It's not blood because when blood oxidizes, it's not our blood anyway, our type blood, because when blood oxidizes, it turns black. So if that was bone marrow, that would be black. So those two things, the fibers and the residue, are just unknown in anything else. And here they sit in a star child, both of them, and yet science just says, you know. And this is what they say. This is what you need to understand about science, and all of these physiological differences that I've just pointed out, they mean nothing to mainstream science. They mean
Not interested.
in January of
sense,
this
does it?
year, a geneticist contacted me out of the blue, and he said, I think you really might have something. And he said, if you send me a sample, I will take a new technique, a new shotgunning technique, which recovers much smaller pieces than the old primer technique. So he took it. About 6 weeks later, he got back in touch with me, and he says, you're really not going to believe what's happening here. And I don't believe it. I've done it enough times now to where I'm convinced that I'm doing it right, and we're getting some very unusual results. Some of it comes out human, sure enough. You see right here, this sequence of 265 base pairs long, 265, no question about it, part of the star child is human. Except, next slide, some of the star child's DNA comes back with this incredible reading. No significant similarity found. 342 base pairs long. It's a coherent base pair sequence not found in the NIH database. I said, well, what's the answer? And he says, well, it could be, and here's where we go off the deep end, it could be that it's an alien, entirely an alien, born to a human bone. And I said, what? How would that happen? How would you get a pure alien born to a human mother? So he made up a slide for me and sent it to me. And he said, now understand, this is happening today. This is happening today. If a human female has mitochondrial disease, which means that her mitochondria are bad and are going to produce very, very flawed and dead children for the most part. If it's found out that she has that and she wants to have a child with her mate, her husband, what they can do is they can take her package, put it in a dish, you've heard about this, and mix it with her husband's sperm and create a zygote with her chromosome package and her husband's chromosome package. Then they take an egg, a good egg from a third party, a woman, take that woman's chromosomal package out, put the zygote in, put that egg in the first woman, and she will have a baby that will be her and her husband's genes, but it will have the mitochondria of the third woman. So he said we could have the same thing. You have two aliens getting together, making a zygote, and for whatever reason, taking the chromosomal package out of a female egg, putting it in, and then she will bring it to term, and it's a full alien, nothing but alien DNA in it, but it has her human mitochondrial DNA. Now, why? Why would they do that? We don't have any idea. We know this is a radical thing to say. We know that it's going to be met with a lot of resistance because it's going to prove that we don't just have a hybrid between a human and an alien 900 years ago. We have clear genetic engineering, clear evidence of genetic engineering 900 years ago. It's a much bigger pill for science to swallow. It's also going to cause a much bigger revolution.
But do you think this would be worthy of going on the news?
Everybody, because
this is factual data, science.
But this is where we are. This is what we think we can do. This is what we know we can do. We're now in the process of trying to get the money to start the process of sequencing the whole genome, because when you sequence the genome, at the end of that period, it's only about 3 to 4 months. From the time you start, 3 to 4 months, you have an answer. And you have a general idea of what that percentage is going to be, whether it's 15%, 20%, whatever. You can do it within, say, 5 points of error, just recovering the whole genome. And then you have the period of 8 to 12 months where they're going to have to fine-tune it and figure out all of the unknown parts. And then they'll be able to say within a margin of error of 1 or 2% what the difference is. And that difference is going to stick, because anybody that does it again, that's the beauty of DNA. It's the math of biology. It's repeatable again. And this is why we win, because we are producing something.
So a lot of people actually think that ultimately this skull might in some ways be a bit of a smoking gun.
DNA trumps nature. So whatever the DNA says is whatever.
Strange how he got a very fast-acting cancer and died.
Oh.
He did get a very aggressive form of cancer and died within about 6 months. Kind of strange that. So it's gone off the radar a little bit, but there is still some research going on. But it's really frustrating because he was getting very close to having the major DNA. Right, now I'll keep you for 5 more minutes. Let me just tell you where your secrecy comes from. Your secrecy comes from how many people in this room are under the age of 63? Put your arm up. Alright, put your hand down. How many people are above 63 in this room? Right, there's a few of you, thank you. All those above the age of 63, you were born in an era when there was no real debunking going on. Everybody from the age of 63 and under has lived in an era of debunking, which stems from 1953 with what's called the Robertson panel. A team of scientists under H.P. Robertson were commissioned by the CIA, those devilish people in America, and they basically, their remit was, and it's actually in declassified documents now, their plan was to strip the aura of flying saucers in the minds of the public, and we're going to do that by engaging with the media to debunk it. So basically from 1953 onwards until now, in America and Europe, we live in a world of debunking. All thanks to the lovely CIA. Yeah? And that's because powerful people did not want the real evidence to come out. Now, people say, well, why doesn't it come out? Well, think about this. Would Barack Obama still be, would America still be a superpower if he stood up on the White House lawn and said, well, actually, we've known about these things for about 70 years and we can't get anywhere near them. Their technology is far superior to ours. If he did that, they wouldn't be the superpower anymore, would they? Because then they'd be rendered the Earth vulnerable, so they wouldn't really have that aura, so conventional weapons would have no effect. They're basically saying the technology is way too much. Now, think about the oil. Our world is dominated by oil. Fossil fuels. We drive around in petrol-driven cars, diesel, jet engine aircraft. Well, what if these UFOs, because they move in strange ways, they've developed free energy, anti-gravity propulsion systems that don't need fossil fuel? So are the chief executive of Shell, BP, are they going to be happy to be told that we don't need your petrol anymore? We can have free energy with anti-gravity. They're not going to like that, are they? They're not. Mankind, unfortunately, is very selfish in general, and power corrupts. The higher you earn, more money you get generally. So those people are not going to see all their profits, their trillions of dollars, not needed anymore. So they have an influence on government. We've all heard of people like the Bilderberger Group. Now these are secret organisations of very powerful people, many ex-chancellors, ex-prime ministers, very secretive club. Nobody really knows what goes on, but some people speculate that these people are kind of a shadow government. And they do exist. They had a meeting in Watford, I think 2 years ago, that made all the news, but nobody could get in. It's a very select clientele, but many former presidents, chancellors of the exchequers, financial directors are there. It's a very lucrative club. And a lot of people speculate that there is kind of like a shadow government. So there are powerful corporate reasons why the truth doesn't come out. But what I'll just tell you is, if you've been reading your newspapers in the last month, there is something actually quite strange going on. And I think I know the reason why. How many people have read about Hillary Clinton's interest in UFOs? There's been the odd little comments on shows. Yeah? You've seen her interview and she's made little jokey remarks. This is all staged, we think, at the moment. There's a guy called Steve Bassett, who I was in San Marino with last weekend, and he's currently in London. I'll be seeing him later next week. He's working with 8 of our national newspapers, top editor roles, to get the story out of what's really going on with Hillary Clinton. How many people have heard of what's called the Rockefeller Initiative? Put your hand up in the air. Right, a handful. This is the smoking gun, potentially. I'm not saying it's going to make a breakthrough and that everything's going to come tumbling forward and they're going to start telling the truth, but I would have to say, having been monitoring this subject for a long time, there is a kind of a chance that something is really going on. For those of you who are not aware of what the Rockefeller Initiative was, it was between 1992 and 1995, Hillary Clinton was part of a group that studied and urged to have all UFO documents released, i.e. about extraterrestrial contacts. Okay? It didn't come out for whatever reason, but she was heavily involved, and UFO researchers have obtained over 1,000 pages of documents regarding this. Now, she worked heavily with Bill Clinton, who was then president, John Podesta, who was one of his advisors, a guy called Buchanan, who was one of the top advisors at the time, alongside 10 UFO researchers, and Rockefeller, the billionaire Rockefeller, to put together like the best evidence of UFOs and ET. So when you see Hillary Clinton on TV so far, have you ever heard anybody say to her on TV yet, what was your involvement in the Rockefeller Initiative? It's not happened, and that's because they're deliberately not asking the question. It's been mentioned in some of the newspapers, and all the newspapers. Now, historically, the New York Times and the British Times do not go anywhere near UFOs. But over the weekend, there was an article about Hillary and UFOs in the New York Times, and also our Times. Unprecedented coverage at the moment. Almost daily there is these talk about in the national newspapers, and that's because Steve Bassett is working with a lot in America and in the UK to get and give all the newspaper editors all the 1,000 pages of the Rockefeller Initiative. Why? Because when, as you probably will almost certainly do shortly, get the Democratic nomination for the party in the US to run against probably Donald Trump, yeah? When she becomes the official Democratic presidential candidate, we then are in the last few months up to somebody being elected, her or Trump. Okay? Now during that election period, keep an eye out for a TV interview that says the question that she's not been asked yet. So if you're watching one of these chat shows and she's on, if the TV interviewer asks the question, it's political dynamite. Because if he says, Hillary, you've made some remarks about UFOs, tell me about your involvement in the Rockefeller Initiative. If you hear that, she's got two choices. She either makes a lie and says, well, I don't know what you're on about, in which case that will be exposed by the newspapers who've all been armed with all the relevant documents, or she will have to tell the truth. And the odds are she'll have to tell the truth. So if she tells the truth, that's when the secrecy may cause a bit of a landslide. Because suddenly she goes from joking about UFOs, yeah, I'll release stuff if I can, to, well actually I did 3 years of study on this. And suddenly he goes from ufology being illegitimate subject in the mainstream to wow effing we. This is mainstream. You're telling me you're involved in 3 years study and you've got 1,000-page documents, blah blah blah. The mainstream are not prepared for this, and they're just getting up to date. So some people, Steve Bassett, those people who know Steve Bassett, he's a political lobbyist in America, done a great job so far. He actually thinks that there is a real chance that should that question be answered honestly, there may be a major tidal wave of change in the media, and suddenly we become a legitimate subject instead of a fringe, we're all crazy. Because if the presidential candidate has studied UFOs for 3 years, 20 years ago, that makes her something of a bit of an expert. We've never had a president who's gone on the record like that. So if she's giving legitimacy to it, and it's not just a bit of fun, then we could be in for a bit of a game changer as the media suddenly elevate ufology from the fringes to mainstream. It's going to be an interesting time. Right, well, what time is it now?
25 to 11.
Well, you've been a brilliant audience, really patient. If anybody wants to see me at the end, ask me questions, by all means, but it's 10:30, 25 to 11. I don't want to keep you any longer. Thank you very much for your time.
Can I just say that we've raised just about £340, which we're going to give to the school on Monday. And I've never seen this hall so quiet for the whole evening. So you're obviously what we knew of a great speaker. So thanks ever so much.
Thank you very much.